The heat under the cottonwood is a physical thing, a weight pressing down on the bowed heads of the townsfolk of redemption. It shimmers off the baked dirt and sticks the sweat-dampened calico of the women's dresses to their skin. Dust, fine as flour, coats everything. The warped planks of the general store, the drooping brim of the preacher's hat, and the pale, tear-streaked face of the girl standing on the auction block. Her name is Alara Vance, though few here use it. To them, she is simply the orphan, a piece of unclaimed baggage left behind when cholera took her parents 2 months prior. Now, their meager assets liquidated and the town's charity worn thin, she is the final item to be disposed of. The auctioneer, a portly man named Croft who also owns the saloon, mops his brow with a greasy kerchief. "Want my bid for this able-bodied girl," he booms, his voice slick with false bonhomie. 19 years old, strong back, knows her letters. Can cook, clean, mend, a fine asset for any household or ranch needing an extra pair of hands. A bond of indenture, say for 5 years. Who'll start the bidding at $5? A grim silence answers him. $5 is a fortune. Men shuffle their feet, avoiding Alara's gaze. She stands there, her hands knotted in the thin fabric of her worn dress, her focus fixed on the gnarled roots of the cottonwood, trying to anchor herself to something solid as humiliation washes over her in sickening waves. She is chattel. Less than chattel. A horse would fetch a better price. "Come now, gentlemen," Croft cajoles. "This is Christian charity. Taking in a stray. For dollars, then. Think of the labor." A farmer with a sun-scorched neck mutters, another mouth to feed. His wife, a woman with a face as hard as dried leather, adds, "And who knows what trouble she'll bring." The whispers ripple through the crowd, stinging Alara like horseflies. She keeps her eyes down, her world shrinking to the scuffed toes of her boots. The shame is a fire in her belly, burning away the last of her tears. On the edge of the sparse crowd, leaning against the wall of the smithy, a figure stands apart. He has been there for the better part of an hour, motionless as a desert hawk, his presence a silent rebuke to the town's proceedings. He is not one of them. His skin is the color of rich earth, his black hair bound by a simple leather tie. He wears buckskin leggings and a plain cotton shirt, and his face, stark and unreadable, is marked by a quiet authority that makes the town's blustering men seem like loud, foolish boys. He is Apache, a man from the lands that bordered this raw settlement, and his very existence is a source of unease for the people of redemption. But he only watches, his dark eyes missing nothing. $3. Croft says, his voice losing its cheer. $2. For God's sake, someone give me $2 for 5 years of work. A low bid comes from a scrawny trapper, known for his cruelty to his dogs. $1. A collective sigh of relief and disgust moves through the crowd. Croft brightens. $1 is bid. A fine price for such a sturdy girl. Going once. Alara's breath catches in her throat. The trapper, Jeb, grins, revealing a row of stained teeth. She knows him by reputation. The thought of his hands on her, of being locked away in his foul, isolated cabin, is a terror worse than starvation. Going twice. She braces herself, a silent scream building inside her. Sold. She is not for sale. The voice cuts through the heat and grime, sharp and clear as the crack of a whip. It isn't loud, but it commands absolute silence. Every head turns toward the smithy. The Apache warrior pushes himself off the wall and walks forward, his stride measured and deliberate. He moves not like he's on their dusty street, but like he's on his own land, which in a way he is. He stops a few feet from the auction block, his gaze lifting to meet Alara's for the first time. There is no pity in his eyes, only an unnerving intensity. He looks at her not as an object, but as a person, and the simple act of being seen is so shocking it almost buckles her knees. Croft puffs out his chest, his authority challenged. "Now see here. This is town business. You've got no say in it, Apache." The warrior ignores him, his eyes still on Alara. "This woman," he says, his voice resonating with a depth that stills the air, "is not yours to sell. She is bound by a debt of honor to my people. A confused, angry murmur spreads. The sheriff, a man named Miller who valued peace over justice, steps forward hesitantly. What are you talking about? What debt? The Apache man finally turns his gaze on the sheriff, and for the first time, Alara sees a flicker of something beneath the stoic mask, a cold, unyielding fire. A life debt, he states, the words dropping like stones into a silent pool. It is a tribal right, one your laws cannot touch. He then looked back at Alara, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Her father earned it. I am here to claim it. And with that declaration, a claim no one in the stunned, hostile crowd understood but dared not immediately challenge. The world Alara knew, a world of shame and fear under a sweltering cottonwood, cracked open, revealing a future more terrifying and uncertain than she could ever have imagined. He had not bought her. He had claimed her. And as he reached up a hand, not to grab, but to offer, she was faced with a choice that wasn't a choice at all. The known cruelty of the trapper or the profound unknown of the Apache warrior. The journey away from redemption was a study in silence. The warrior, who had not yet offered his name, walked ahead, leading a sturdy-looking pony he had tied behind the smithy. He hadn't forced Alara. He had simply waited for her to descend from the auction block and fallen a step behind him. The eyes of the entire town had followed them, a mixture of fury, suspicion, and raw, thwarted greed. Silas Croft had shouted after them, threats about theft and property, but the warrior never broke his stride. Sheriff Miller had simply watched, his hand hovering near his pistol but never drawing it, his face a mask of conflict and indecision. He knew, as did they all, that to provoke a fight with an Apache on the edge of their territory was to invite a firestorm. Alara followed, her mind a numb whirlwind. The dust of the street gave way to the sparse grass of the open plains. The sun beat down relentless. The silence between them was not empty. It was thick with unspoken questions. Who was this man? What was this life debt he spoke of? She remembered her father, a kind, quiet man who had been a doctor back east before a longing for open skies brought them west. He had treated anyone who needed him, settlers, prospectors, even on a few occasions, natives who came to their homesteads seeking aid. Had one of them been this man, or this man's kin? She couldn't recall a specific face. Her father had never spoken of a life debt. Her fear, a sharp and icy thing back in town, began to slowly melt under the oppressive heat, replaced by a profound exhaustion. She was no longer property to be auctioned, but she was still a captive of circumstance, her fate now tied to a silent stranger. She watched his back as he walked. He moved with an economy of motion, a grace that spoke of a life spent traversing this harsh, beautiful land. He was aware of everything. The whisper of the wind through the sagebrush, the distant cry of a hawk, the crunch of her own clumsy footsteps behind him. He was a part of this landscape, while she was an intruder, pale and breakable. They walked for what felt like hours, climbing steadily into the rolling, rock-strewn foothills that marked the beginning of Apache lands. The air grew thinner, cooler. The scent of dust was replaced by the clean, sharp smell of pine and juniper. Just as Alara felt her legs would give out, he stopped. They stood at the entrance to a small, hidden canyon, its walls carved by millennia of wind and water. A narrow creek, impossibly clear, trickled over smooth stones. Tucked against the base of the canyon wall was a simple dwelling, a wickiup framed with sturdy branches and covered with layers of brush and hide, smoke curling lazily from a hole in its roof. It was a place of profound peace, a stark contrast to the squalid, noisy town she had left behind. An old woman emerged from the wickiup as they approached. Her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, her white hair neatly parted in two long braids. She looked at the warrior, then her dark, intelligent eyes settled on Alara. There was no hostility in her gaze, only a deep, penetrating curiosity. The warrior spoke to her in their language, his voice softer now, melodic. Alara stood awkwardly, feeling intensely out of place, a pale weed in a carefully tended garden. The old woman listened patiently, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she looked at Alara again and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then she turned and disappeared back inside the dwelling. The warrior finally turned to Alara. "My name is Kale," he said. His English was precise, with only a slight accent. "The woman is Nana. She is my grandmother's sister. You are safe here." The words, simple and direct, were the first kindness Alara had been shown in months. They landed with such force that she felt a sudden, sharp sting behind her eyes. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her voice raspy. "Why did you do that?" Kale's gaze drifted toward the canyon entrance, as if he could still see the town shimmering in the heat below. 10 winters ago, my brother was bitten by a rattler while hunting. We were far from our camp. A white man found him, a man who carried medicines in a leather bag. He did not see an Apache boy. He saw a child in need of help. He stayed with him for 2 days, using his skill to draw the poison and fight the fever. That man was your father. Alara's hand flew to her mouth, a forgotten memory surfacing. Her father, returning to the homestead, exhausted but with a quiet satisfaction on his face. He told her mother he'd been delayed helping a young boy, dismissing her worries with a wave of his hand. "Decency doesn't have a border, Mary," he had said. "My brother lived," Kale continued, his voice low and resonant. "An honor debt was created. A life for a life. When one's bloodline is in peril, the debt must be paid. I heard of your parents passing. I heard what the town planned. To let them sell you like an animal would be to dishonor my brother's life and your father's spirit. It was not a choice. It was my duty." He spoke of duty and honor as if they were tangible things, as solid as the rock walls surrounding them. In redemption, those words were used to justify cruelty and exclusion. Here, they were the foundation of a rescue. Nana reappeared, carrying a wooden bowl of water and a piece of clean cloth. She held them out to Alara, her expression still unreadable but her gesture clear. Alara took them, her hands trembling slightly. As she washed the grime from her face and hands, the cool water felt like a baptism. "The town will not be happy," she said quietly, looking at Kale. "Croft, he saw me as a prophet he lost. Croft is a man who fills his emptiness with noise and coin," Kale said with disdain. "His anger is the wind. It will blow itself out." But Alara knew better. She had seen the look in Croft's eyes. It was not just about money. It was about power. An Apache warrior had walked into his town and taken something he considered his, and he had done so with an authority that Croft, for all his bluster, could not match. The wind Kale spoke of felt more like the stillness before a violent storm. In the quiet sanctuary of the canyon, she felt safe for the first time in months, but a cold dread coiled in her stomach. The debt may have been claimed, but she feared it was far from being paid. The days that followed fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons, a stark departure from the clock-bound, frantic pace of the white man's world. Alara's life became a tapestry of new sensations, sounds, and skills. The initial awkwardness of her presence began to fade, replaced by a quiet routine of shared existence. Kale did not treat her as a guest or a burden, but simply as another person occupying the space. He gave her a sleeping pallet on one side of the spacious wickiup, separated from his own by the central fire pit. It afforded her a privacy and respect she had not been granted even in the supposedly civilized homes of redemption. Nana became her silent tutor. The old woman, who spoke only a few words of English, communicated through gesture and example. She taught Alara how to grind corn on a flat stone matate, the rhythmic scraping sound becoming a morning meditation. She showed her which wild plants were for medicine and which for stew, her gnarled fingers pointing out the subtle differences between a nourishing root and a poisonous one. Alara, a quick study with a desperate need to be useful, absorbed it all. She learned to scrape and prepare hides until her hands were raw but strong, to weave yucca fibers into cordage, and to listen to the language of the canyon, the way the wind changed before a rain, the specific call of the bird that signaled a predator was near. She was contributing, earning her keep not through indentured servitude, but through participation. The shame that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a budding sense of self-worth. Her body, once seen as just a strong back for labor, grew lean and tough. The sun browned her skin, and the constant work sculpted new muscle in her arms and shoulders. She was becoming a part of the landscape, no longer an intruder. Cale was a constant, quiet presence. He would leave at dawn each day to hunt or patrol the borders of their territory, returning at dusk with a rabbit or a deer slung over his shoulder, or sometimes with nothing but the dust of the trail on his buckskins. He rarely spoke of his activities, but Alara understood he was their guardian. He was watching the approaches from redemption, ensuring their peace was not disturbed. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. Nana would often hum old songs, her voice a low, reedy murmur. Sometimes, Cale would work, fletching arrows with meticulous precision or repairing a piece of tack. In these quiet moments, Alara began to see the man beneath the warrior's stoic facade. She saw the patience in his hands, the deep respect he showed Nana, the way his eyes would soften when he looked at the stars that glittered like diamond dust in the canyon's opening. One evening, he was carving a piece of wood. She watched him, fascinated by the way the knife seemed an extension of his hand, peeling away slivers to reveal a shape within. "What are you making?" she asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. He didn't look up from his work. "A story. You could tell a story in wood. Some stories don't need words," he replied. He held it out for her to see. It was a small, intricately carved hawk, its wings just beginning to take shape. The hawk sees far. It sees the truth of the land. It sees the mouse hiding in the grass and the snake sleeping on the rock. It does not judge. It only sees what is. Alara felt a lump form in her throat. He was speaking of himself. He was the hawk who had seen her, a frightened mouse hiding in the grass of the town's contempt. "In your town," he continued, his voice low, "they see what they want to see. They see an orphan, a burden, a thing to be used. They do not see the spirit inside." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "Your father saw my brother's spirit. That is the debt I repay." The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. It was more profound than any touch. He was telling her that he saw her, truly saw her, and valued what he saw. A fragile tendril of trust, planted the day he'd claimed her, began to unfurl in her heart, blossoming into something warmer, something that felt dangerously like hope. But the world outside their sanctuary had not forgotten them. One afternoon, while Alara was gathering berries near the mouth of the canyon, she heard the unmistakable sound of shod horses. Her heart leaped in her throat. She ducked behind a cluster of boulders, peering through a crack. Two riders were there, Sheriff Miller and Silas Croft. They stopped just short of the creek that served as an unspoken border. "This is as far as I go, Silas," the sheriff said, his voice tense. "This is their land. We push further. We're asking for war." Croft, his face red with anger and exertion, spat on the ground. "Bah? Over one runaway girl? That savage stole my property, Miller, right out from under my nose. Made me a laughingstock. She ain't property, and you know it," Miller sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "And he ain't just a savage, that's Cale. His people hold this territory. He is standing. We don't." "Standing? He's Apache," Croft sneered. "Since when do they have rights that trump ours? I want her back. The council is behind me. They see it as an insult to the whole town." Suddenly, Cale was there. He seemed to materialize from the very rocks and shadows, his bow in hand, an arrow nocked but not drawn. He stood on his side of the creek, his presence radiating a calm, lethal authority. Sheriff Miller's hand instinctively went to his gun, then dropped. Croft's face purpled. "Cale," Miller said, his voice strained but level. "We don't want trouble." "Then you should not bring it to my doorstep," Cale replied, his voice flat. "The girl," Croft snarled. "We've come for the girl. She's a ward of the town. The girl has a name. It is Alara," Cale corrected him coolly. "And her wardship is mine, claimed by a debt of honor your town council is too ignorant to understand. She is not here." Croft laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think we're fools? We know she's in there. Send her out." or we'll come in and get her. Cale took one step closer to the creek's edge. You are welcome to try, he said softly. The invitation was more chilling than any threat. He was not just one man. He was the guardian of this land, and his confidence was absolute. He glanced at the sheriff. You are a man of law, Miller. You know what it means to cross this line. Your friend's greed is not worth the blood of your people. Take him and go. From her hiding place, Alara watched, her breath held tight in her chest. She saw the conflict in the sheriff's eyes, the pressure from Croft, the fear of Cale, the weight of his responsibility. For a long moment, the four of them were frozen in a tableau of imminent violence. Finally, Miller grabbed the bridle of Croft's horse. He's right, Silas. It's over. Let's go. This isn't over, Croft hissed, his eyes locked on Cale, full of venomous promise. Not by a long shot. Miller tugged harder, and with a final, hateful glare, Croft allowed his horse to be turned. They rode away, their departure leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Cale stood watching until they were out of sight. Only then did he unnock his arrow. He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Alara's hiding spot with unerring accuracy. He didn't admonish her for being there. He simply waited. Shaking, Alara emerged from behind the rocks. The safety of the canyon suddenly felt terrifyingly fragile. They hadn't crossed the line today, but Croft's parting threat echoed in the air. He won't stop, she said, her voice trembling. No, Cale agreed, his face grim. Men like him believe the world belongs to them. When it proves them wrong, they try to break it. He looked at her, his expression softening as he took in her pale face and frightened eyes. He saw not this sturdy girl from the auction block, but the woman she was becoming, resilient, capable, yet now terrified of losing the sanctuary she had found. And in that moment, Cale felt his own resolve harden. The debt of honor had compelled him to act. But now, seeing the fear in her eyes, a deeper, more personal instinct took root. This was no longer just about his father's spirit or his brother's life. It was about her. The thought of Croft laying his hands on her, of her being dragged back to that town, ignited a cold fire in his gut. He had claimed her out of duty. Now, he would protect her out of something else entirely, something he did not yet have a name for. The confrontation at the creek marked a turning point. The fragile peace of their existence was shattered, replaced by the low, constant hum of a looming threat. The canyon, once a perfect sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a menace. Every gust of wind sounded like the approach of riders. Alara found herself starting at the slightest noise, her brief sense of security stripped away. The fear that had defined her life in redemption returned, sharper now because she had something precious to lose. Cale grew even more vigilant. His dawn departures became longer, his evening returns later. She could see the strain in the tense line of his jaw and the weariness in his eyes, though he never spoke of it. He was a lone sentinel holding back a hostile world, and she felt a pang of guilt for being the cause of his burden. She was the focal point of the town's rage, the object of Croft's obsessive fury. Her own internal conflict deepened. The gratitude she felt for Cale was blossoming into a powerful, confusing affection. She admired his strength, his unwavering honor, the quiet kindness he showed her and Nana. She found herself watching him as he worked by the fire, memorizing the planes of his face, the quiet intensity of his gaze. When he spoke to her, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the evening, her heart would beat a little faster. This burgeoning emotion was terrifying. To care for him was to make herself vulnerable in a new and profound way. If the town succeeded, if they took her back, losing this life, this place would be unbearable. But losing him, that was a thought she couldn't even allow herself to complete. One evening, a storm rolled in, a violent summer squall that turned the sky to bruised purple. Rain lashed the canyon, and lightning cracked across the sky, its flashes illuminating their wickiup in stark, ghostly detail. Nana was asleep, her breathing soft and even, but Alara was too restless. Cale sat staring into the fire, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond the physical. "You can't keep this up forever," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. He didn't turn. "I will do what is necessary." "They will come back," she insisted. "Croft won't let it go. He will convince the others. They'll come in force." She wrapped her arms around her knees, shivering, though not from the cold. Perhaps it would be better if I left. If you took me somewhere far away, to another town where no one knows me." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The thought of leaving him, of leaving this place that had become her home, was a physical pain. But she couldn't bear to be the reason he was harmed, the reason his people might be drawn into a fight. Cale finally turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight. His expression was grim. "And what would you do there? Another auction block? Another man who sees you as property? You would be trading one cage for another." He shook his head, a decisive, almost angry movement. "No, your place is here." "My place?" she whispered, her heart aching. "What is my place, Cale? I am a white woman living among the Apache. I'm a debt you're forced to pay. I bring nothing but danger to you." He moved then, closing the small distance between them in 2 silent strides. He knelt before her, his presence so intense it seemed to suck the air from her lungs. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take the small wooden hawk he had carved, which she now kept on her pallet. "You are not a debt," he said, his voice low and fierce. "The debt was the reason I came. It is not the reason you should stay." He looked from the carving in his hand to her face. "You see this hawk? It is not a cage. It has wings. It can fly wherever it chooses. It stays where it finds a home." He gently placed the carving back in her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that shot straight through her. For a long moment, they knelt there, the roar of the storm outside and the crackle of the fire inside the only sounds. In his eyes, she saw not duty, but a deep, aching sincerity. She saw a reflection of her own burgeoning feelings. "This is my home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The admission was both a surrender and a declaration. It was the truest thing she had ever said. A subtle shift occurred in his expression, a softening of the hard lines around his eyes. "Then we will defend it," he said simply. Together. The storm outside began to subside, the rain gentling to a steady patter. The decision had been made. There would be no more running, no more hiding. They would stand their ground. The bond between them, forged in the fire of a shared threat, had been tempered into something new, something unbreakable. It was no longer about a debt of honor owed to the dead. It was about a promise of life made between the two of them. 3 days later, the warning came. A young Apache boy who had been watching the town from the high ridges rode into the canyon, his pony lathered in sweat. He spoke rapidly to Cale in their native tongue, his words urgent. Cale listened, his face hardening into a mask of stone. When the boy had gone, Cale turned to Alara. Nana had already begun to move with quiet purpose, packing dried meat and filling water skins, her actions betraying no panic, only a grim acceptance of what was to come. "Croft has done it," Cale said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He has gathered a posse, more than 20 men. They're not coming to talk. They ride at dawn tomorrow." The final confrontation was upon them. There was no more time for quiet moments or unspoken feelings. The high-pressure countdown had begun. "What will we do?" Alara asked, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. She would not show fear. She had chosen this. She would face it with him. "Nana will go to the high camp, where the others are," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "She'll be safe there." He then held her gaze, and she saw the question he would not ask aloud. He was still offering her a way out. He could send her with Nana, hide her away. She shook her head before he could even speak the words. "No," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "I am not leaving. You said we would defend this home together." For the first time since she had known him, a slow, genuine smile touched Cale's lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of weariness. It was a smile of respect, of acceptance, of shared purpose. Together, then, he affirmed, They did not plan for a battle in the traditional sense. Cale knew he could not defeat 20 armed men in a direct fight. His plan was one of moral and tactical superiority. He would not meet them with an ambush of arrows, but with the unassailable power of the truth. The confrontation would not happen in the shadows of the canyon, but out in the open, where their actions would be witnessed by the sun itself. The chosen place was the creek, the same creek where Croft had issued his threats. It was the boundary line, both literally and symbolically. To cross it was to commit to an act of war. As dusk fell, Cale made his preparations. He did not sharpen arrowheads or string his bow. Instead, he gathered a few significant items. A peace pipe that had belonged to his grandfather. A leather pouch containing something small and hard. And from a parfleche box, he took a necklace made of polished bone and turquoise beads, a thing of simple, profound beauty. He came to Alara as she stood watching the last rays of sun paint the canyon walls in hues of orange and rose. He stood before her, the necklace held in his hands. In my culture, he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, when a man and a woman choose to share a path, their lives are woven together. Her safety becomes his. Her honor becomes his. Her heart becomes his. He lifted the necklace. This was my mother's. It is a symbol of protection, of belonging. He paused, his dark eyes searching hers, giving her one final chance to turn away. If you wear this, you are no longer Alara Vance, the orphan from the white man's town. You are Alara of the G. Carilla, under my protection, under my name. They will not be taking a ward of their town. They will be trying to take my wife. The word hung in the air between them, shimmering with a weight that stole her breath. Wife. It was not a proposal born of romance in a moonlit garden, but a declaration of alliance on the eve of battle. It was a strategic move, a public claim that would change the entire dynamic of the confrontation. But looking into his eyes, she knew it was more than that. It was the truth of their hearts, given voice by necessity. Her hands were steady as she lifted them to her neck, turning so he could fasten the clasp. The cool weight of the beads against her skin felt like a shield. It was a brand, not of ownership, but of belonging. She was no longer a piece of driftwood, tossed about by the currents of other people's greed and cruelty. She had found her harbor. I will wear it, she said, her voice clear and strong. She turned back to face him. I will wear your name. He looked at her, truly looked at her, standing there in her worn dress, transformed by the turquoise at her throat and the fierce courage in her eyes. The debt was long since paid. This was a choice. His choice. Her choice. And as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together, no longer just a warrior and a survivor, but a man and a woman ready to face the dawn and whatever it might bring. The morning broke cold and clear, the air scrubbed clean by the previous night's rain. A profound stillness lay over the land, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Cale and Alara stood on their side of the creek, waiting. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence, but her hands were steady at her sides. The weight of the turquoise necklace was a comforting anchor. She was not the same girl who had stood on that auction block. Humiliation had been burned away, replaced by a resolve as hard and unyielding as the canyon rock behind them. They didn't have to wait long. They appeared first as a dark line on the horizon, a smudge of motion against the golden plains. The line grew, resolving itself into individual riders, more than 20, as the boy had said. They were led by Silas Croft, who sat his horse with an air of puffed-up triumph, and Sheriff Miller, whose face was a grim mask of resignation. They were a grim collection of townsmen, farmers, ranchers, and saloon loafers, their faces a mixture of righteous anger, grim determination, and nervous bravado. They carried rifles and pistols, the metal glinting in the morning sun. The posse pulled up on the opposite bank of the creek, the jingle of harnesses and the snorting of horses sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet air. For a moment, no one spoke. It was a standoff between two worlds, the loud, aggressive force of the town and the quiet, unshakable resolve of the two figures who stood against them. Croft was the one to break the silence, his voice booming with false authority. "Cale, this is your last chance. Send out the girl. We have a warrant from the town council for her return. She is a ward of redemption." Cale stood motionless, his arms crossed over his chest. He let Croft's words hang in the air, then dissipate like smoke. He did not look at Croft. He looked at Sheriff Miller. "Miller," Cale's voice was calm, carrying easily across the water. "You are a man of the law. Read me this warrant." The sheriff hesitated, then reluctantly unrolled a piece of paper. He cleared his throat. "It states that Alara Vance, being an orphan without guardian, is declared a ward of the town of Redemption and is to be returned to its custody. Alara Vance is no longer here," Cale stated simply. Croft laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't play games, savage. She's standing right next to you." "The woman standing next to me," Cale said, his voice rising in power and authority, "is my wife." He gestured to the turquoise necklace. "She wears the symbol of my family. She's of my clan now. Your warrant for Alara Vance has no power here. To take her would be an act of war, not law." A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the posse. Men exchanged confused glances. The word wife changed everything. This was no longer about retrieving a runaway servant. It was about tearing a woman from her husband, an act even these rough men understood to be a grave transgression. Alara felt their 24 pairs of eyes on her, but for the first time, she did not flinch. She met their stares, her chin held high. She took a step forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Cale. "I am his wife," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing across the creek. "This is my home. I made my choice." Croft's face contorted with rage. His plan was unraveling. "A choice? He bewitched you, or threatened you. That's no real marriage. It's a sham." He turned to the men behind him. "Are you going to let this stand? An Apache stealing one of our own and calling it marriage? It is you who deals in shams, Croft." Cale's voice cut like a blade. He reached into the leather pouch he carried and pulled out a small, flat, gray stone. He held it up for them all to see. "Do you recognize this? Your father gave it to mine, a token of a land agreement your people immediately broke." He then looked directly at Alara's father's memory. "But not all white men are without honor." He then began to speak, not in anger, but with the simple, powerful cadence of a storyteller. He told them the story of the life debt of a white doctor who saved an Apache boy without asking for payment or passing judgment. He spoke of honor, a concept that required a debt to be paid not with coin, but with protection and respect. "Your town put a price on this woman's head," Cale declared, his voice resonating with moral fury. "You try to sell her dignity for $1. Her father's spirit saved my brother's life. In return, I have saved his daughter's honor. Which of these is the act of a savage, and which is the act of a man?" The men of the posse grew restless. They had come for a fight, fueled by Croft's rhetoric about town pride and stolen property. But they were now faced with a story of honor and a direct accusation of their own shame. They looked at Alara, not as a helpless victim, but as a woman who had made a stand. They looked at Cale, not as a thief, but as a man repaying a sacred debt. It was Alara who delivered the final, devastating blow to Croft's authority. "Silas Croft does not speak of my welfare," she called out, her voice filled with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "When my parents died, he was the first at our door, not with condolences, but with ledgers. He claimed my father owed him money and took our last 2 milking cows as payment, leaving us with nothing. He wanted to buy me for $1 not out of charity, but because he profits from the misery of others. He is the thief here. He tried to steal my future. This man," she laid a hand on Cale's arm, "gave it back to me." The accusation struck home. Several of the farmers in the posse, men who had also dealt with Croft's predatory lending, exchanged knowing, angry glances. The foundation of Croft's posse crumbled into dust. They had been manipulated, their own sense of justice twisted to serve one man's greed and wounded pride. Sheriff Miller looked at Croft's sputtering, furious face, then at the resolute couple across the creek. He saw the wavering loyalty in the eyes of his men. He had been pushed into this, and now he saw a way out. He straightened in his saddle. "This is not a matter for the town," he declared, his voice firm. "The woman has made her choice. She is a married woman. We have no jurisdiction here." He turned to the posse. "We're done. Go home." "No!" Croft shrieked, his face apoplectic. "You cowards!" But it was over. One by one, then in groups, the men turned their horses. They refused to meet Croft's eyes, a silent but powerful condemnation. They tipped their hats, not to Croft, but with a grudging respect toward the two figures at the creek's edge, before riding away. Soon, only Croft and Sheriff Miller remained. "You've lost, Silas," Miller said quietly. "Go home before you lose what little you have left." Croft stared across the water, his face a mask of pure hatred. He looked at Alara, standing proudly beside the warrior, wearing the turquoise of his people. He had lost. He had been defeated not by force of arms, but by the power of truth and the strength of two people who chose to stand together. With a final, inarticulate cry of rage, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, a lone figure of fury vanishing into the plains. Sheriff Miller lingered for a moment. He looked at Cale, then at Alara. He gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of concession, of respect, of peace. Then he too turned and rode away. The silence that descended was absolute. It was the silence of victory, of relief, of a future that was suddenly, breathtakingly, their own. The threat was gone, broken against the rock of their unified stand. Alara felt the tension drain out of her, leaving her weak-kneed with relief. She leaned against Cale, and his arm came around her, strong and solid, holding her up. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply held her as she let out a long, shuddering breath. They stood there for a long time, watching the dust from the departing rider settle. The sun was higher now, warming the air, and the creek burbled peacefully between its banks. It was no longer a border between two hostile worlds. It was just a creek flowing through the land that was their home. He turned her to face him, his hands gently framing her face. He looked at her, at the turquoise at her throat, at the fierce, beautiful light in her eyes. The auction under the Cottonwood felt like a lifetime ago, a bad dream from another world. This was real. He lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that sealed the promise made on the eve of battle. It was a kiss of homecoming, a silent acknowledgement that their lives, once separate streams, had now merged into one powerful river, destined to carve its own path through the vast, open wilderness. And as they turned to walk back toward the quiet sanctuary of the canyon, they walked not as a warrior and a rescued orphan, but as a husband and wife, their steps in perfect sync, their future stretching out before them, as bright and limitless as the western sky. The days that follow are quiet, stitched together with the simple threads of a life reclaimed. The specter of redemption and its judgment fades with each sunrise, becoming a distant memory, a story that belongs to someone else. The canyon is once again a sanctuary, its peace no longer fragile, but deeply rooted, earned through courage and truth. There is a new ease between Alara and Cale, a comfortable intimacy that settles into the spaces once filled with uncertainty. Their marriage, forged in the crucible of conflict, now blossoms in the quiet soil of daily life. He teaches her the names of the constellations as they blaze across the night sky, telling her the Apache stories that live among the stars. She, in turn, reads to him from the one book she managed to save from her father's possessions, her voice a soft melody against the crackle of the evening fire. Their life is a gentle exchange, a weaving of two different worlds into a single, strong tapestry. Nana, who returned from the high camp with a knowing smile, now treats Alara not just with acceptance, but with the warm, fussing affection of a true grandmother, her gnarled hands often patting Alara's in a gesture of unspoken love. One afternoon, Cale finds Alara by the creek, not looking outward for threats, but inward, her bare feet dipped in the cool, clear water. She has a small, smooth stone in her hand, which she is polishing with a piece of buckskin. She is humming a tune, a simple, content melody that seems to be a part of the landscape's own song. He stops, watching her from a distance, struck by the profound rightness of the scene. She is no longer a pale, frightened girl, but a woman grounded in her own strength, radiating a quiet joy that makes the entire canyon seem brighter. The auction, the indenture, the shame, all of it has been washed away, leaving behind the pure, untarnished spirit he first saw a glimmer of. He knows, with a certainty that settles deep in his soul, that the life debt has been repaid 1,000 times over, not by his actions, but by her very presence in his life. He hadn't just saved her from being sold. He had found a part of himself that had been missing. She looks up then, as if sensing his gaze, and her face breaks into a smile that is just for him. It is a smile of absolute trust, of shared history, and of a future they will build together, stone by stone. He walks toward her, his heart full, understanding that honor had brought her to him, but love was what would make her stay. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. They found their justice and happiness. What part of their journey against prejudice touched you the most? Let us know below.